to Literacy Evaluations, What Parents Need to Know. I'm Jennifer Bernheim, founder of Right to Read Advocacy. At Right to Read Advocacy, we educate and empower parents of dyslexic learners. We do this through special education advocacy, as well as educational opportunities such as today's webinar. Leading our webinar is Catherine Scholl. She is both a literacy evaluator and a member of Right to Read Advocacy, as well as a special education advocate. You can learn more about Catherine and her credentials, as well as Right to Read at righttoreadadvocacy.com. Our webinar today, the informational part will be about 40 minutes long, and then we'll have time for Q&A. We also have some questions that you have submitted beforehand that we will try to get to as well. All right, we'll get started.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today to talk about what is a literacy evaluation and why would we need a literacy evaluation, and also what do we do with the information that we gather after we do these evaluations. So the first thing with a literacy evaluation is that we have to determine if it's needed. And then we're going to talk about the key components of what those literacy evaluations look like. And then we're going to dig a little bit deeper into three of the ones that are generally used to uncover literacy weaknesses. That would be the WIAT, the GORT, and the CTOPP. And then we're going to talk about what we're going to do with those results after we have the evaluations. Okay, so determine if a literacy evaluation is needed. As a parent, how do you know if your child is struggling? How do you know what to do when your child is struggling? So a lot of times we have evaluations that can help us determine what the weaknesses and strengths are. And so we're going to use them to see if this, first of all, if the child is struggling, even if they are getting support. And then we're going to look to see if there's delayed milestones. So if you have a child that is not, he's in first or second grade and still doesn't know letter sounds or letter knowledge, is not reading the sight words. So milestones that we see as typical, if they're delayed, then that should initiate an evaluation. Poor academic performance. So if you have a child that's in third, fourth grade maybe, and they are still struggling, the report cards come home and grades come home, and you're just, they're just not doing what you think that they should be doing or what the teacher expects them to do. So poor academic performance would be another reason to initiate an evaluation. Persistent writing and spelling issues. You see that your child is consistently misspelling some common words that he's had on his list since kindergarten. And you're just, you're worried because he's just not getting it. And then complaints of reading challenges. So if you have a child who is complaining every night of doing the homework, comes home with his book that he's supposed to be reading, and he really is fighting you on reading, and you just don't know why, even though it's a story that he's going to enjoy. And so he's just not liking the reading and the writing, and you just feel that it's a struggle every day or every night to get him to sit down and read with you. So these are all reasons or red flags that should definitely initiate a literacy evaluation. Some other ones is complaints of reading challenges. A lot of times we see kids who really do not like to read, and then they start getting anxiety around it, or you're seeing behavioral issues at school when they have to do any kind of reading or writing assignments, so they're avoiding it, and then that causes behavioral issues. And obviously parental concerns, family history of learning disabilities. So you have these parental concerns, and then you have a family history of dyslexia or written expression disabilities. And the teachers are starting to notice it. They're noticing that your child just is not reaching the milestones that they should. The other big one that usually will initiate an evaluation on the school side is screening assessment results. So in the state of Connecticut, it is a law that every student in K through 3 has to have a literacy screener 3 times a year. And what these literacy screeners do is they assess where the child is. They'll assess their weaknesses and strengths, and they're a gauge on whether your child does need extra support or intervention. So these screeners are state mandated, and usually a school district will have a threshold, or what we call a cut score. So if your child falls below the cut score, then they will qualify for intervention. So as a parent, you have the right to ask for these screening assessment results if you are having concerns. Now, literacy evaluations, if we're going to be doing an initial comprehensive evaluation, it can be done either by the district. So maybe the district is seeing these red flags, and then they would do them. They would pay for them. They would be done in a school setting, or they can be parent driven. So a parent, can go to an outside evaluator if they think that there are concerns, and have them done by an outside evaluator. Or if the district does do the evaluations and you as the parent really disagree with the district's results, or you disagree with their depth and breadth, so you don't feel like they dug deep enough to see the issues. So there are different ways to get a comprehensive literacy evaluation. So just to recap, it's either through the school district or private, or the district diving deeper after you've done a private.
And that deeper dive, that's known if you're requesting that outside of the district. You want to mention the IE as well, or?
Yeah, so the IEE, if a district isn't seeing what you're seeing, they're not seeing the need for an evaluation. They're just like, oh, he's doing fine, or he'll catch up, and you really are adamant that there is an issue, then you can request what we call an independent educational evaluation, otherwise known as an IEE. Now, that doesn't mean the district has to do it. The district has two options. First option is either to agree and say, yes, we will grant you the IEE, which means that you can go to a private evaluator and the district pays for it, or they can say no. And if they say no, then they have to file for what we call due process. And that's a whole long process. But if you have those screening assessment results and you have observations by teachers, the teachers are seeing issues, you're seeing issues, most times, if the district is doing the right thing, they will sit at the table and discuss what kind of assessments they can do to help your child succeed.
Great, thank you. And do you always recommend that a parent starts with the district, bringing the concerns to the district before proceeding with an outside evaluation?
Always. I would always use the free resources that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Again, everybody wants your child to perform the best. And so typically you would start with the teacher and you would bring your concerns to the teacher and, ask how she feels. And then if you feel that you're not getting anywhere there, then you would, escalate it to the principal. But definitely I always recommend, as an advocate, and as well as an evaluator, is that you start with the teacher and ask for more evaluations there.
Great, thank you.
So understanding the key components of a literacy evaluation. So what does that mean, a literacy evaluation? So now you've asked for one, and what does that look like? Well, we know that strong literate students they have the foundational skills in oral language, phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, comprehension, and fluency. So these are the six, it's the backbone of a good reader. And they kind of feed off and build off each other. So oral language obviously is the ability to speak, to be able to comprehend auditory language. And then the phonological awareness, we'll talk about a little bit more further on, but the phonological awareness is being able to hear and manipulate sounds. And then phonics is being able to break down a word in sounds. Vocabulary is also very important, which vocabulary obviously we get from reading and also from listening comprehension, which then goes into comprehension, which is also, we can have a child that's very strong in oral comprehension, but really has no reading comprehension. And then fluency. In order to be a successful reader, the fluency piece has to be there. So that the fluency takes into consideration rate and accuracy and comprehension. So how fast are we able to read and still comprehend what we're reading? And how accurate are we? Are we missing words along the way? Are we skipping words? Are we having to go back and self-correct what we're reading? So these are all the components that we look at when we're doing a literacy evaluation. Now, a comprehensive evaluation is not a comprehensive evaluation if we don't cover all of these pieces. Because a lot of times what we find out is that a child is really strong in comprehension, but really weak in phonological awareness. And when we see that, then we have to dig deeper and find out why. Is it because that child hasn't been taught the foundational skill, or does he truly have a disability and cannot learn those skills without intervention? So when we start to do a literacy evaluation, we look at these components and then we choose an appropriate assessment based on these components. We also will dig into writing. And the writing process is not only the mechanics of it, but the other pieces that go with written expression, reading comprehension. And then we also we assess the behaviors of the reading and writing as we're doing the evaluation. So when we are, the evaluator is sitting down and doing one of these assessments with the child, we're not just looking to see that they have or do not have the skill. We're looking at the whole picture. We're looking at the environment. We're looking at, do they hear a sound and get distracted? Do they take their pencil and start on the right side and then quickly realize, ooh, I need to start on the left side? How are they holding the pencil? Are they looking at a word and using strategies such as tapping out? Are they saying the word, then repeating the word? Are they saying the word in sounds and then putting it together? So these are all behaviors that are so important in an evaluation. And they're so important it's so important to have a skilled evaluator with your child, because a lot of times if we're not looking at all of those behaviors, we're really missing something important. Because a lot of kids that have a literacy weakness, they've learned to compensate. And so when they compensate, their skill level may be high, but then when you give them something a little bit outside of their independent level, they can't do it, right? And so all of those behaviors we need to look at and document. That also in a best practice literacy evaluation, there should be an observation section where the evaluator writes in all the observable behavior. And a lot of times you can see, they'll say, that this behavior may have caused this to happen. And so we really have to, that's really a key piece of this. And then also parent and teacher input. When we're putting together our literacy evaluation, we're talking to the parent at depth, we're talking to the teacher, we're finding out what the behaviors are at school and what are they doing at school? What are they doing at home? Are they shutting down at home but not at school? So these are all big pieces of this, uncovering what the weakness and strengths are of a good reader. And we look at all of these components to put together a report that will then help guide us in instruction.
Great, excellent.
Now, there are for educational achievement tests or literacy evaluations, what they're going to do is they're going to measure the academic skills that children are supposed to acquire through instruction. There are two types that we do. The first one is a multi-subject, which is looking at basic skills across all areas. So it's kind of like dabbling in math. It's looking at phonological awareness. It's looking at reading. It's looking at writing. But then we have what we call the single subject assessments, which look at different skills within one area. So for example, we do a multi-subject evaluation, which is looking at everything. It's broad. And we notice that the child is really having weakness in writing or reading. We would then pull out another evaluation that only assesses writing or reading. And then we would dig deeper to see where in that reading realm are the weaknesses.
Great. And Catherine, can you mention, I know you're going to talk about these formalized assessments, but there are also informal ones as well? Could you do a quick mention of those?
Yes. So we have the formal assessments, which would be done in a comprehensive evaluation. And then we have informal, which we usually use for what we call progress monitoring or benchmark assessments. So those would be once we figure out what the weakness is, or it could be whole class, or it could be one-on-one. We're going back and we're doing an informal assessment to see where they are, to see how they're progressing, to see if what we're doing is working.
Great, thank you.
So the first one we're going to talk about is the Wechsler Individual Achievement Test, which we call the WIAT. It's in its 4th edition. This is one of those multi-subject broad assessments. So this assessment is a great starting point. And I always start when we're doing a comprehensive evaluation with something like the WIAT. And it's only assessing achievement. It's not looking into cognitive skills. It's really just looking at academic skills and where your student falls compared to the norm, compared to other children their age or in their grade. And so it assesses the skills in various academic skills from writing, reading, fluency, writing fluency, mathematics. We can start the WIAT with ages 4 all the way up to 50. And the WIAT is very comprehensive in that it consists of 20 subsets. We evaluate listening, speaking, reading, writing, and math. And it also, the reason I love the WIAT is that it does measure all 8 specific learning disabilities that have been identified through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which we call IDEA. So we have these, one of the classifications for a special ed is specific learning disability, SLD. The WIAT will assess those areas, those 8 specific learning disabilities, to either identify or rule out whether this child has that disability. The other reason I love the WIAT specifically is because it has a dyslexia index. Jennifer and I work in Right to Read. Both of our passions is dyslexia because we both have dyslexic children, and I've worked as an educator with dyslexic children for many years. And the WIAT is a great way to gauge if a child has dyslexic tendencies, or if there's a reason to dig deeper to see where the deficits lie. So that's kind of an overview of what the WIAT 4 is. It's that multi-subject, and it is going to look at 3 core academic composites. So once the evaluator does the testing, all of the testing, which usually will take, it could take, and the WIAT is kind of tricky because the WIAT, it can take one to 2 sessions of 45 to 60 minutes each, or it could take 3 to 4, depending on the child, depending on the environment, depending on the child's skill level. But the goal is, at the end of the testing, is to come up with 3 academic composites to give you, the parent and the teacher, knowledge on where this child is performing based on grade and age. And so we look at, the first composite is reading. So we look at word reading and reading comprehension, and the report should give you a percentile of where your child falls. It'll give you your child's at 60 percentile in word reading. So that means that he's reading at or above 60% of students his age or in his grade level. And so it's really a great way, because remember, it's norm referenced. So it's a great way to see academically where your child is performing. And so again, once we get that score, we then we then assign a label, so to speak, that this child is either falling at average, above average, superior, or below average or poor. And so that's another indicator. So sometimes school districts will, they look at that score, they look at a scaled score in the percentile and see what score they're going to look at to determine if they need intervention or if they qualify for special education. Now, one score on itself is not going to qualify. So if you have a child that has a below average or a poor score, that's not going to qualify. Again, it's these core composites that we kind of look at together to see a pattern. Same thing with written expression. The WIAT is going to look at spelling, alphabet writing fluency, sentence composition, essay composition, and then we go on to mathematics, which is numerical operations and math problem solving. And so once we have finished all of these subsets, we kind of put together a report based on where the strengths and weaknesses lie within your child.
Great. And Catherine, I know you mentioned twice now this idea of norm reference. Can you explain what that means?
So the norm referenced is, and I don't have it in front of me on what the amount is that we use for the WIAT. So it's basically that they're when they do the research and when they're doing the testing to develop the scores, it's devised on the normal population. So and I don't know how deep you want me to get into the curve.
Okay, not yet. No.
Yeah. So, yeah, because it can definitely get kind of deep. But the norm referenced is basically it's based on a large pool of students at that age, at that grade level, and then they take the norm of it, and then they pull apart the data from the norm out to the left and the norm out to the right. Do you want to add anything to that? Because I feel like that might be confusing.
No, I just think it's helpful to know that your child is kind of being evaluated compared to like these norm numbers or results, right? Kind of what the bigger pool or population has scored on that same test, right? At that age, is it age specific?
It can be both. So the WIAT gives you the option of doing age or grade. I personally like the age better. So if your child is, 6 years old and 9 months, we're scoring him based on all of those children that took that test at 6 years and 9 months.
Great.
Because sometimes, depending on what state you live in, the group there's different. You can have a child that's 5 years old in kindergarten. You can have a child that's 4 years old in kindergarten, and you can have a child that's 6 in kindergarten. So looking at kindergarten just as a grade can sometimes skew the score.
And as a parent, should you ask how they did this?
Yes, and they should report it. But yes, I would definitely, especially if you get the results from the district and you have questions and the report isn't showing what you're necessarily seeing at home. I would always ask, are you looking at age equivalent or grade equivalent? It's a good question to ask.
That is a great tip. Thank you. Things I didn't know years ago that I wish I did. All right.
And then we have, to move on with the WIAT, we also have the two processing composites that also help us dig deeper into things like dyslexia or written expression disabilities, and also those 6 supplemental composites. So what the supplemental composites really are is, say that you're doing the assessment and you're getting a feel that the student has weaknesses in writing, right? Then we have these other supplemental composites and subsets that we can do to look at different skills within that one area. We talked about the fact that the WIAT-4 does have the dyslexia index, which I love. It has its own little reporting sheet. It really gives a great report for the parent to read in very simple terms. And what the dyslexia index does is it takes 4 of our subsets, being the phonemic proficiency, word reading, orthographic fluency, and pseudo word decoding subsets, and we put them into a composite score on their own, right? So we're not looking at math when we're looking at the dyslexia index. We're only looking at the skills that we know children with dyslexia struggle with. We are coming up with a score for that. And it's very helpful for parents and educators to have that when you are specifically looking to see if your child has specific learning disabilities in reading or, AKA dyslexia.
Mhm. And Catherine, is this dyslexia index always been a part of the WIAT, or is it unique to the WIAT 4?
It has not always been, the WIAT 4 has it. There are other assessments now that have a version of the dyslexia index, because we do know that 1 in 5 students right now, they may not be identified, but that they could be dyslexic learners. So it is a very important assessment to look at, so we can then give the student the accommodations that they need to be successful.
Now, say a parent receives the child's report, the WIAT 4 is administered, and there's no dyslexia index, which I've seen this before. Would you go back to the district and say, could you please also provide the dyslexia index?
Yes, I would definitely. If you suspect, if that's the disability that you suspect, and you would have this conversation hopefully before the evaluation started, and make sure that was one of the evaluations that they did.
Great, thank you. Big tip there. All right, our benefits of the WIAT.
Okay, so the benefits is that it's going to provide you and the school with standardized scores, right? So it's that norm reference. We're going to look at the standard score. It's going to give you the percentile rank, the age equivalent, and we're going to look at those to determine what their academic strengths and weaknesses are compared to their peers on a national level. It's also used to identify learning disabilities. We talked about that, the specific learning disabilities. It's aligned with those 8 categories. And most importantly, it really helps guide what we're going to now do. It's going to let us know these are the skills that we need to hone in on with this child. These are the accommodations and modifications that we need to be giving them to be successful. These are the goals and objectives that we're going to look at. It also helps us monitor over time. So if your child is in special education, they have an evaluation, and a comprehensive evaluation done every 3 years. So we would, if you have a child that has one in 3rd grade, we then can compare the ones that we do in 6th grade to see how much growth that they've done. Now, we're not going to wait 3 years to see how much growth has happened, right? We are going to do those informal assessments throughout, or other assessments throughout that 3-year period. And a lot of times we do use the WIAT in conjunction with other things to determine eligibility for special education for things like dyslexia. The administration of it, in order to administer this test, there are qualifications that you have to have. You have to have a master's or in education, special education. And with all of these tests, you should have training in the test that you're doing, because they are intricate tests to not only administer, but also to score appropriately. And like we talked about before, a good evaluator knows what they're looking for, not just in the skill set, but in the observation of the student doing the test. The administration we talked about before will vary depending on the student's grade level, ability level, and test taking style. You may have a child that needs multiple breaks. They may say to you, I need to go to the bathroom, I need to get a drink of water. Or you may have a child that says, I don't want any breaks, I just want to finish. And these are all things that we're going to take into consideration when we're scoring it and when we're doing our observation notes.
Great, thank you. And could you ask the qualifications of the administrator of the evaluation?
Okay. Yes, as you should.
Okay, got it. And there was a nice reminder in the comments from Laura, if they don't give you the percentage scores, and often they don't, use a conversion chart, because average is a large range. And Wright's Law does have information on that, and we can share that link. And then also in the Wright's Law books, there's a great conversion chart that was really next to me all the time and very helpful. So thank you for that reminder.
Yes, and you, as the parent, have the right to ask for. Now, when you're scoring these evaluations, they always give all of that information. It's just a matter of how the district is going to present the data to you. The data is always there. It's just a matter of how we're presenting it.
Exactly. Great.
Okay, so now we've talked about the big one, right? The big multi-subject. We've done that. Now we've realized that the student did poorly on the reading and writing subsets. And so now we're thinking, like, what's driving this? What's going on? Is it a disability, or has he just not been taught these skills? So we're going to dig deeper into that literacy piece. And one of the kind of the gold standard that we do for students who we suspect may have reading or writing disabilities is we look at the Gray Oral Reading Test, 5th edition, which we call the GORT. The GORT is also a standardized norm referenced measure of oral reading fluency and comprehension. We can do that with students ages 6 to 23. And it has 2 different forms that are an A form and a B form. So you can do the A form, 1 year, and then the B form another year. They're exactly developmentally the same. And what the GORT looks like is it is basically a story, age-appropriate story that the student has to read in a certain amount of time. And then we score it on rate. So how fast were they able to read it? And how accurate were they? Did they miss words? Did they skip a word? Did they not say the word correctly? And then we take those 2 scores together to come up with a fluency score. And then after they're done reading, we ask them 5 comprehension questions. And so if they score at a certain place, then we go on to the next story and then to the next story until they bottom out. And then we come up with a standard score to assess where their rate, accuracy, and fluency, as well as comprehension are. This is a great, appropriate assessment for students who you suspect have reading and writing disabilities. And it also includes the oral reading index, which is, again, it's the composite of those 3 of the scores that we can compare to students their age. The benefits, it's great to identify students with reading difficulties and diagnose reading disabilities. So if we have the WIAT scores, right? So you kind of see a picture now. We have the WIAT score where it shows written expression is low, phonological awareness is low. And then now we're going to add on the gray, on the GORT, and we see now there's weakness here, right? So we're kind of seeing a pattern. And it also helps see where the pattern falls. It's going to tell us strengths and weaknesses. It's also going to evaluate progression reading because the equivalent forms allow for pre and post intervention testing. Some districts use this as a pre and post. So they'll give them in the beginning of the year, they will add the intervention and then give it again, right? But not the same form. They'll give the form B, but it's the same. And to see if the intervention's working, right? We want to make sure that intervention is working because there's no point if not. Same thing, the administration of the test needs to be by a qualified, trained person. It can't just be somebody who, has a period free on Thursday at 1 o'clock and they get asked, can you take this kit and do the GORT? That's not okay. It needs to be somebody who has a lot of experience testing and writing reports and scoring these evaluations. The GORT's very quick. With a first grader, it's usually about 5-10 minutes because they're usually not going to get past the first or second story, especially if there's a disability suspected. And then if you have I've done seniors, juniors in high school, and we've gotten all the way up to the last story. And that could take 45 minutes to an hour to do. And the last test that we're going to talk about today is the comprehensive test of phonological processing, 2nd edition, which is also known as the CTOPP. Now, the CTOPP is also norm referenced, and it's looking at that phonological processing abilities related to reading. and which we know research tells us that if a child has weakness in phonological processing or phonological awareness, there's a good chance that there is a disability such as dyslexia. And so I love this test because it's a great gauge on where this child is on phonological processing. It includes memory skills, and it also includes phonological naming. There are 2 different versions of the CTOPP. We have 2 age levels, 4 to 6, and then 7 to 24. So each version is going to test different skills. So phonological awareness is really the building blocks of reading. And we're going to get into that in a second. But the ages 4 to 6, so there's 7 core subsets. There is the deletion, which we call elision, blending words. So the first part is where we give the child a word, we ask them to delete part of it and then repeat it. So this has nothing to do with writing or reading. You're literally just asking the child to listen to something and either delete or add or substitute another sound. Research shows that this is an incredibly important skill for reading. I can't even stress that enough. Phonological awareness is the foundation of reading skills. If we see a deficit in a child in phonological awareness, that is a red flag. So the sound matching at the early age, memory for digits. This is a big one. This is a child. A lot of times, parents will come to me and say, he's in 3rd grade. He doesn't know his phone number. He cannot remember his phone number. He can't tell me his birth date. He can't tell me the months in order, right? Memory for digits is going to evaluate that. They're going to give the child the numbers and then they have to repeat them. And it's a good indicator, memory for digits. So these are the subtests that we look at from 4 to 6. And then again, it'll give us a composite performance score that we can report back on. The next one starts at age 7. And that one is going to have different subsets for more appropriate skills. So it's going to have rapid letter naming is in there. And then the supplemental tests dive a little bit deeper into the phonological strengths and weaknesses. And then it gives us the 4 composite performance scores. So the 3 tests, do you want to go through? Okay, so it's the same thing. The benefits, again, it's going to see what student falls above or below their peers, determine strengths and weaknesses. And then we can use that to document progress after we start intervention. Qualifications, same thing. It needs to be somebody who is trained and has experience doing these tests and reading these tests and knowing what they mean. The CTOPP can take up to 30 to 40 minutes, again, depending on the child. So when we're doing a comprehensive literacy evaluation and we're trying to uncover strengths and weaknesses, we always start from the top down. We're always going to start with that multiple test, like the WIAT 4. Then depending on the weaknesses that we see, we're going to drill down. So if we suspect dyslexia, and I keep saying dyslexia because that's kind of what we do. If we suspect dyslexia, right, we're going to then do the GORT. Then we're going to do the CTOPP. We're going to look at all of those together in combination with parent report, teacher report, observations. As an evaluator, I go into the classroom. I sit and trying to be unobtrusive and observe the child in his natural setting. So we take all of these components together to kind of come to a diagnosis or a lack of a diagnosis, right? Well, no, maybe he just needs some extra intervention. We don't suspect dyslexia or written expression dysgraphia, right? Which is another level of dyslexia. So we look at all of these pieces, we put them together, and we decide where are we going? What are we doing next? If this child does show signs of dyslexia, what does that intervention look like? You work with your school team to figure out an appropriate plan for the child.
And Catherine, I know we mentioned phonological awareness, just so
yes,
listeners had a better understanding.
Yes, because it can be a little tricky, right? We talked before about how phonological awareness is the foundation of literacy success. It's being able to hear sounds and manipulate sounds. It's how we divide our language into parts, right? So it's at, knowing that that is the beginning sound, is the end sound, right? It's saying a word like cowboy and knowing that they are two separate syllables put together to be one word. It's all about that auditory piece. And phonological awareness in a best practice classroom is usually done explicitly whole class, right? Every child in kindergarten first and hopefully second, they're getting phonological awareness activities. They're fun. The kids love them. They're verbal. They're not writing. They're not reading. They're literally just listening and repeating or manipulating, right? So we know that the phonological awareness is when it's broken down into the smallest part. Can the child recognize that and be able to put it all back together? So I kind of it's like a puzzle, right? It's like you're taking the sound, you're doing a puzzle without the pieces. It's just all listening. And we know that children who have strong phonological awareness have greater results in reading down the road. And so this is I love this visual because it's really nice. It shows us that phonological under the umbrella. So there's all of these skills that kids have to know to have strong phonological awareness, such as, being able to recognize words in a sentence, knowing that when I speak to you and I tell you a sentence, that sentence is separate words. Onset and rhyme, it's being able to rhyme, right? That's why we do nursery rhymes. And unfortunately, a lot of schools have done away with that, but great building foundations, singing nursery rhymes, singing, silly songs with your kids in the car. It's building up that phonological awareness, talking about syllables, right? Clapping words out. We don't need to write or read anything. We give them a word like chocolate and we ask them to, at dinner table, clap out, chocolate. All of these different things that are going to strengthen this phonological awareness. And then you've got the phonetic awareness, which goes more into the segmenting of words, the isolation, being able to add, delete, and substitute, and then the blending of those sounds. So they all build on each other, phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, then to start going into learning the letters and how to write them and put them together.
Great. Thank you. That is really helpful to have an understanding of all the pieces that fall under phonological awareness. Before we move forward, there is a question that I was hoping you could answer. Would the GORT be conducted without doing the WIAT? That's the first part, and then I'll let you answer that.
It depends.
I think
it's a little
gracious there, yes.
It depends.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my personal recommendation, if I am suspecting that my child has deficits and weaknesses, and I'm suspecting something like dyslexia or dyscalculia, I would want them to be done in conjunction. Because guess what? If I do the GORT and I show a weakness, what is that telling me? It's telling me that on one day, at one time, one snapshot, my child had a weakness. Right? It's just telling us that the rate and the accuracy are off. If I do something like a WIAT, I can look at the dyslexia index and have 4 subsets that now I can go in and I can say, listen, this wasn't just one data point. I always like to look at least 3 data points to devise a plan. I think it's important. Having one data point is not I don't feel it's best practice.
Right. And like you mentioned before, each of these tests helps paint a picture, right? And when you're seeing results consistently, right? Or I don't want to use the word deficits, but deficits consistently across multiple evaluations, then it's easier to hone in, I think, on a classification or, what are next steps for this child, rather than just doing the GORT and saying, okay, your child has, dyslexia, which you would.
You would never, yeah. You wouldn't classify or diagnose dyslexia just from doing a GORT. It's
or one evaluation.
One assessment. Yeah, assessments and evaluations should never be done in isolation. We talked before about all of the components. It really has to be a whole picture. Yeah, and if somebody tells you that they can, I would be weary of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. There was a second part to this question, which is also another great question. If you're asking the school district to do the evaluations, do you request what evaluation to complete, or do the districts choose what evaluations they will complete?
So we have to remember that as parents, we are part of the team. So a PPT, it's what we call it in Connecticut, is the the placement team. The team is the teacher, the special ed teacher, and most importantly, the parent and the student. And so you can certainly say, I know, or I feel that I suspect dyslexia, and I know that the WIAT, the GORT, the CTOPP, the TOWEL, these are all assessments that really are these assessments that you do. If they say no, then you need to ask why. Because these are, I mean, there are, so the GORT isn't just the only one that's going to test rate accuracy and comprehension and fluency. They may have one that's similar and is going to test the same thing, and that's fine. I mean, we chose these because these are the ones that I prefer to use, but there are other ones that I do. So you do have the right to ask. Now, a lot of times districts will say, we will not name a test by name specifically, but we will name what skill we're testing. So they say, and then what I always do, I have 2 children that are in special ed, and when they're going through their assessments, I always ask them, once they decide on who the evaluator is, I reach out to the evaluator and I say, what test are you doing with my child? Because at that point they will know. And if I have questions about it, then I will ask. But you are an integral part of the team.
Catherine, that's a great tip. I haven't heard that before. Just reach out and ask once you know. I love it. Okay, good. Thank you. So now they've done the evaluations, hopefully a comprehensive evaluation, and they want to use, hopefully your teachers, educators, your team are going to use those results to drive the educational plan. And what does that mean? How do we use these results?
Yeah, so it's you're taking all of these data points, and again, we're not going to use one data point. We're going to use multiple data points. And, the informal observations, those are also, behavior observations. We're going to then use those to come up with a plan, an intervention plan. But before we do that, we're going to see where the weaknesses and strengths lie. So based on the weaknesses, that's going to drive the plan. And if they do qualify for special education, so if you're talking about a student who is classified as dyslexic, they're going to have an individualized instruction plan or individualized education plan, which we call an IEP. The test scores, the data scores, along with the observation and the teacher reports are going to drive that IEP. Now, remember, as the IEP, the parent is also a part of the team and has a very loud and strong voice, or at least they should. If they don't, that's an issue. They are also part of this planning process. They are part of putting together goals that you think your student should be reaching, right? Along with the teachers, everybody has input. Just like we did a comprehensive eval, it's a comprehensive input process of putting together this IEP, which is basically going to be the Bible for your child on what needs to be done, how it's going to be done, when it's going to be done, and who is going to do it. And so these data points are very important, and that's why it's really important to make sure that someone who's doing these assessments know what they're doing, and they're giving comprehensive, accurate, reliable results, right? They need to be reliable and they need to be accurate. So we're going to use these results to drive our instruction, and then to also drive what kind of progress monitoring tools we're going to use. Also, for the teacher, it means that they have to, or they may have to, adopt their teaching methods. So if you have a child that's, ADHD or dyslexic, and they need extra time, or they need extra wait time. So we know their memory for digits was low. So that means that, they have a hard time memorizing things. So we're not going to expect that child to answer within 2 seconds, right? We're going to give them a 5-second wait time, right? And so that it's going to drive how the teacher is teaching, right? So it's differentiating the instruction, not only how we present the skills, but also what the skill is, how we present the skill on paper. So that's what that is A lot of times these, the results are going to drive instruction in the fact that they will need a multi-sensory approach. So these students that just, so they're not, we know from the testing, maybe they're not a visual learner. Maybe they're not an auditory learner, right? So we're going to implement multi-sensory approach so that child can access the material. So it's not that they can't access it. We have to give them the tools to access that material. It's also, it's going to drive communication, because the more knowledge that you have as a parent and the more these reports are explained to you in detail, the more power you have for the communication, because now you know what you're talking about. You know, okay, you guys did a GORT and his rate was way below the norm. What are you doing to increase that rate? I want to know what types of activities are you doing in the classroom to increase that rate? Are you giving him, 1-minute reads 3 times a day, or like whatever that looks like? So now you have the knowledge to then ask the appropriate questions. Again, it goes to providing structured support. Another big one now is this assisted technology. A lot of times a comprehensive literacy evaluation can incorporate an assistive technology eval. And that will go to, how does the child learn best and what kind of technology can we give him to help him access that? So a big one with dyslexic learners is text to speech, speech to text, right? So they're still getting the content of the book, but they're doing it on their iPads, they're doing it on their laptops or their phones. We have Learning Ally, which is a favorite of ours, that reads the book to them, but it also has other features where you can highlight the text, they can follow along. So that assistive technology is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger in classrooms. And then this all goes to being able to advocate, right? Being able to advocate for your child, because again, knowledge is power. The more knowledge you have, the better you're going to become at advocating for your child. And then your child will be advocating for himself, which is an amazing thing to witness.
Great.
So that's really, that's kind of, there's so much more, this is kind of an overview of, why we do an evaluation, how we do it, and what are some of the typical evaluations that we should be doing for children that we suspect has a specific learning disability in reading or writing.
Great. Thank you, Catherine, for that comprehensive overview. We do have a few questions. One here is, if your child has already been diagnosed with dyslexia, is it still best to use the WIAT, or could the school use the Woodcock-Johnson instead for the triennial?
Yes, absolutely. So we only chose the WIAT 4 because to go into 2 of them, maybe down the road, we will do a more comprehensive on just the academic tests. Yes, they're very similar. They're going to give you, they're norm referenced. They're going to give you age and grade. So that is a great choice as well.
Yeah, but does the Woodcock-Johnson have the dyslexia index or indicators?
It has indicators. It does not, it's not set up like the WIAT has actual index report that we spit out, that we give to parents based on those 4 subsets. And I'm not sure, I'm not really sure. I haven't done the Woodcock-Johnson in about 2 years, so I can't remember.
No worries. Okay, great. And then how do parents verify that an evaluation is truly comprehensive?
So you have to ask, you have to shoot that email over. I want to know, obviously in a very nice way. I'm just wondering, I want to prepare my child tomorrow for the testing or whenever you're doing. I always ask for what days, what times you're going to be doing it, and what testing are you going to do. And then once you have that information, then, you can glean from there if it's comprehensive. Like I said, if they're only doing 1 data point and 1 test, that is not comprehensive. And they should never either rule in or rule out a disability based on 1 data point. I would say minimum 3.
Great, thank you. And then also, what tests are essential in order to determine another disability such as dysgraphia?
So the dysgraphia, we're also going to look at the WIAT. We're going to start there and drill down. There's another test called the TOWEL that looks at written expression. That one you cannot administer until they're 7, I believe. think it's 7-0. And then there's also, we have something called the DeCoste that also looks at dysgraphia. There's other tests that are specific to dysgraphia. A lot of times if we suspect dysgraphia, we will recommend an occupational therapy consult. So an OT will come in and they look at the mechanics, right? They're trying to figure out why are they not getting the ideas on the paper because, you know, what's happening? Are they holding the pencil correctly? It's, you know, there's a lot of things that go into a dysgraphia classification. So I would start with the WIAT, drill down to the towel or the cost, and then ask for an OT eval.
Great, thank you. All right, good questions. We had a few more that folks had written in. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all, but please do feel free to follow up with an email that Catherine or I could answer your questions. Oh, one more popped up here. Hold on. How can a parent determine if a school evaluator is qualified to administer a test? Our SLP stated this was her first time administering several tests.
That's a little tricky, right? Because if you get the results and again, you're seeing something very different, it's like anything. The more you do something, the better you get at it. I'm hoping that there's a mentor teacher, which usually in special education, we have mentor teachers. So hopefully somebody else is putting eyes on it. You could also request that. You could be very honest and say, listen, so-and-so told me this is her first time. Not that I don't trust her. I'm sure she's competent, but I would really appreciate it if maybe the supervisor of special ed could just kind of take a glance at it. Right. Even the best of us, you know, even people who are doing it for years, we sometimes, if we're seeing something where I would go to a coworker and say, tell me if you think I scored this correctly. Are you seeing, especially in a towel, because a towel is a written test and it can sometimes be subjective, right? Sometimes because you're looking at capitalization, punctuation, and the expression of are they including all of these things? So I would always say best practice would be if there's questions you can always get another set of eyes to look at that and ask if, you know, and be honest and say, she told me this is her first time, so I'm a little weary. I just want to make sure we're doing right by my child.
Great. I know there's one more question. If you wouldn't mind sending that over email, or I can email you directly because I can see your name and that may be helpful. And we will send out a recording of this webinar, hopefully by the end of the week. Again, please reach out if you have any further questions. And thank you so much for attending today's webinar. Catherine, thank you.
Thank you. And please, if there's any further questions, feel free to reach out to my C. Scholl at Right to Read Literacy. Do you have that on a?
Yep. There we go.
Yep, there we are. That's my contact information. So please shoot me an email and I will get back to you. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks. Have a great day.